Hello, Peter. What's happening?
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! Can we get some meatloaf?
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
I'm gonna need you to go ahead and come in tomorrow. So if you could be here around 9, that would be great. Okay?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. It is me, your best friend, podcast extraordinaire, host of Unscripted Ohio, king of the castle, Kyle Lamb. We are brought to you by Buckeye Grove. Good Friday, everybody. I am glad you are back with me. I'm so pumped up. I don't know why. It's just one of those cheery days for me. I haven't had a lot of them recently, so I'm going to count this as a small victory, and I'm going to cherish it. Anytime that you can have a good day, make the most of it. So I am smiling. Anyway, speaking of smiling, Ohio State basketball back to its winning ways. A double-digit victory at home over Northwestern. I'm going to be talking about that here later in the show. Look, it's Northwestern, but you know what? It's baby steps for this team, right? A small step for man, giant leap for Buckeye basketball. You know, you've got to take it's survive in advance. Survival season of college basketball is here. You get late into February and into March, and the name of the game is just surviving. You know, just win, baby. Al Davis, just win. And that's what the Buckeyes did. And actually, I give them credit because as bad as that game started off, those first 10 minutes, oh my goodness. I joked on Twitter, you could probably be charged for child abuse if you let your kids watch that game the first 10, 15 minutes. It was ugly. Oh my gosh. I was just like thinking to myself, there's got to be something more enjoyable to watch than this basketball game. I was thinking of turning it for the time being because it was so bad. But hey, credit Ohio State. You know what? The second half, you've got to be. It almost makes you furious watching this Ohio State basketball team in the second half the way they played, because they played so well. They moved the basketball. They didn't turn it over. They played great defense. And the defense really, for most part this year, has not been a problem. It's what's keeping them in the NCAA tournament discussion. It's the reason that they would probably be in as of today. But just watching the second half, it makes you wonder why they cannot play that way more often. Turning the basketball over that is what it comes down to. Take care of the basketball. When they are doing that, they have run generally efficient offense. They have pretty good sets. Their shot selection is decent. Their biggest problem has just been the ball handling, being loose with the basketball, making lazy passes. They are actually, at times, a good passing team. The key, and I'm going to get into this later, and I'm sorry I'm kind of, going on about this a little bit when I mean to talk more about it later in the show, but look, the key, I think, is just seeing what we saw Wednesday night from Ohio State. Get the ball to the baseline. When they're moving the basketball and they're cutting without the basketball, they do a great job of finding one another. Look, straight ahead with defenders in front of them, they're not very good at finishing at the rim. So the key for them is to get the ball moving from side to side, front to back, middle in, middle out. They've got to get various angles and get going to the basket, because when they do that, they're really good on offense. They're streaky shooters, and of course they don't handle the ball very well, but they actually can run offensive sets good in streaks. We've seen some really good offense. I mean, remember, go back to the beginning of the season, there were a lot of opposing coaches that were so impressed with how Ohio State moved the ball. Several of them mentioned that this is a really, really good passing team, and they can be a good passing team. I know sometimes they make some just seriously absurd passes, some bad ones, right? They're lazy. They sometimes get, lackadaisical. But when they're not, when they're really engaged and they're moving without the ball, I think this team can be a good offensive team at times. It's just, it hasn't been, but the second half of the Northwestern game I thought was a step forward. So I'm going to get into that. I also want to talk a little bit about Zion Williamson. I got some crazy stats on Zion and what Duke has done with and without him this year. And, the good news for college basketball fans, and if you're a Duke fan, is that his injury, you probably saw Duke, North Carolina the other night. His injury is just a grade 1 sprain of his knee, so he should be back. Now, the question is, will he be back? Will he decide to sit the rest of the season out? I say no. I don't think that's going to happen, but I know there's some saying, well, Zion should just sit out the rest of the season, protect his interest for the NBA draft. I disagree with that. I'll get into that also later at the end of the show when we get back to basketball. Mark Gibler, recruiting analyst of Buckeye Grove, of course. You know him as the Zen Master. He is the orb of wonderment, as they say. He'll be along here in a few minutes, and we'll talk some recruiting. Ohio State did get some, I guess you could say, bad news. They got a decommitment from Darvon Hubbard. He is a running back in the 2020 class from Arizona. We'll talk to him about that and whether it is even bad news. Ohio State may not consider it bad news depending on your outlook. So Mark will be along here in just a few minutes. Before we get into recruiting, I saw something on Twitter. I saw a discussion the other day. And my apologies to where it originated. I probably don't want to bend over backwards to be patting other sites on the back anyhow. But I don't remember which site it was that brought this, to the attention. But I thought it was an interesting discussion, about the Michigan-Ohio State game, the rivalry, and whether the game should continue to kick off at noon. And I kind of want to hear people's thoughts on this. I've always been interested in where people are coming from on this because, this question has been debated for several years now as to whether it should continue to be a noon kickoff. There are some that just absolutely swear by the noon kickoff and say it should not be anything else. I remember the 100th meeting in 2006. We had a 3:30 kickoff, and that one was amazing because not only was it the 100th meeting, but you had two undefeated teams. Ohio State and Michigan came into the game undefeated. You had, the Bo Schembechler, passing the night before. It was just a crazy number of things going on in that particular situation and that particular year, which, made the 3:30 kickoff all the more interesting, right? But, I always have wondered, outside of those big games when I think more people were open and receptive to a later kickoff, is there any way some of you would come around on this? And I'm always interested. Look, I'm big on tradition. There are some things that you don't mess with for me. I think taking Ohio State and Michigan away from the last game of the regular season, that's a non-starter. I like that this post-Thanksgiving tradition they've started now that they've moved the season back a week. I really like that, and I would not take that away if I had a preference. Moving Ohio State and Michigan out of the same divisions, I could probably actually I'm not saying that I would support that, but I could probably learn to live with it if Ohio State and Michigan continue to play one another. And I know there are some that would not go along with that because then, you're playing one another from opposite divisions as a crossover game, and then you could still wind up playing in the Big Ten Championship a week later. I think that's kind of cool. I know others would be like, eh. And look, given the way I was not real excited about Oklahoma getting another shot at Texas in the Big 12 championship, I guess if I'm going to be consistent, then I got to say, hey, look, it's probably not a good idea to have a potential scenario where Ohio State and Michigan are playing one another, not just for a second time, but 2 weeks in a row. As cool as that would be, the loser of that game probably doesn't deserve another chance. And I know it's not the same situation because Oklahoma and Texas were in a round-robin situation where they're basically finishing 1 and 2 and playing each other again, whereas Ohio State, Michigan would basically be winning opposite divisions. So it's not the same, but there is still enough of similarity there. If you want to be intellectually consistent, I guess you got to say, yeah, they probably shouldn't play one another for a second time. But I'm probably spending too much time talking about this theoretical scenario that is probably not going to happen. I don't even think it's on the table any longer. But the point I'm trying to make is that there are some traditions and so-called traditions with the game I could be open and receptive to messing with. I'm not in favor of tweaking for the sake of tweaking. I think there has to be legitimate reasons. I think there has to be something to gain. But, the noon kickoff, now granted, I'm coming at this where I'm a night owl. I'm predisposed to not liking to get up in the morning. So getting up for noon games for me it probably plays a small part in my opinion of this. And I'm going to be completely upfront about that. That's part of it. I tend to like 3:30 games a little bit better than noon games for that reason. And it's not that the noon kickoff with Ohio State, Michigan, I think it's kind of cool because on one hand, you get up in the morning and you're not waiting all day long. It's kind of nice because you don't have to feel yourself I know some of you, I know how you are. I grew up in an Ohio State family. I've got a lot of Ohio State friends. I see it from a different vantage point. I watch and they get up and they pace, for hours, waiting for that game. Some of them get up at 7 and 8 in the morning and they're waiting endlessly for the noon kickoff to start. And so I know that's why some of you don't want a 3:30 kickoff or, God forbid, an 8 o'clock kickoff. But there's something special for me. I know I'm an evening person, so that's part of it. But man, I want that 8 o'clock kickoff under the lights. I think it would be absolutely phenomenal. I think it would be an atmosphere that in the right situation, if Michigan comes in, let's say if Michigan came into Ohio Stadium as a top 5 team and both teams are 1-2 or 1-3 or 2-5 or something like that, I think you're going to get the most electric atmosphere you have ever seen at Ohio Stadium or, up there in the big house. I just think that kind of environment would be something else. And I know some of you won't get on board with it, but I would like to see it, even if it's not every year, if you make it a 1-4 thing, so every 4 years there's a night game at Ohio Stadium, or every 4 years there's a night game in the big house. That's 2 out of 8 years that the Horseshoe and the big house are getting night games. I would just love to see something like that. I'm curious. I should probably put a poll on Twitter about this, but I would generally like to get your feedback. If you are against anything but a noon kickoff, is there any scenario where you would like to see, where you would be willing to see that changed, even if it's on a rare occasion or something like that? Or likewise, could you, if you are a person like me that really wants to see the night games, are you willing to concede that it's not going to ever be a permanent thing, but, maybe just a once-off thing or a once every few year thing? I'm curious where people stand on this. I like I said, I'm just surprised. I can get where people are coming from on wanting noon kickoffs. But for me, I don't know. It's just, for me, noon kickoffs are just so outdated. And it's not that there's anything wrong with them, but I just like the primetime thing, under the lights. And I know they did the noon kickoffs for so long because that just used to be advantageous, and they didn't have lights. Most of these stadiums didn't have lights for a long time, or many of them didn't. I think now, in this day and age, though, for me, I love the primetime kickoff. I want to see Ohio State, Michigan primetime under the lights. 3:30 in 2006 got us, the second half under the lights when it got dark. But I want to see kickoff. I want to hear, the white stripes kicking off there right by the student section right before kickoff as it's dark, and I want to see that atmosphere. I think it would just be crazy. I think it would be like anything we've never seen at the Horseshoe. So curious your take. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at KYLam8. Do you or do you not support moving Ohio State, Michigan from its traditional noon kickoff? If so, or if not, please tell me why. Would love to hear your take on that subject.
It's time to go inside Ohio State recruiting and take a peek behind the scenes with Buckeye Grove recruiting guru Mark Gibler and his magical orb of wonderment. They said it couldn't be done, but he's outdone himself once more. Back for another recruiting roundup.
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
All right, we're back now for some more recruiting talk. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Things are looking like going to heat up here in March. A lot of guys setting visits.
Yeah, it sure seems that way. So we had some activity here on Thursday with Ohio State. They actually lost a commitment. So tell us about the Darvon Hubbard situation. It kind of sounds like, I mean, depending on your outlook at Ohio State, seemed to have expected this coming and may or may not have been all that torn up about it. So what is the situation here with Hubbard decommitting, and is Ohio State okay with that?
Yeah, I think this was kind of inevitable. There really has not been much contact there lately, and by lately I would probably go a couple months back. We can speculate on why that is the case, but I think this is more a matter of Ryan Day kind of wanting his imprint on this class in terms of his evaluations of their running back targets. And there, the writing was kind of on the wall here. Darvon had told me not too long ago that there wasn't really any communication there, and it was kind of just okay, waiting for this to kind of happen. And I think both parties were trying to kind of handle this professionally in terms of letting him sort of feel the landscape out for himself. Darvon's got to find a spot now. I think just kind of letting him do some homework on that to where he was comfortable with his own personal situation in terms of where he may look to go at this point. And so that's that. I mean, I thought maybe it might wait a little longer until he could get into official visits, which can start here pretty soon. But it just I guess today was the day. So
it's I think this is a good reminder, Mark, because we always look, the immediate knee-jerk reaction when there's a coaching change is to look at it from the player's point of view and how they're going to view the new staff. But we always forget there's the other side of this too, where, the new head coach, even if he was a former assistant of the old head coach, he's not always going to share the same opinion on every recruit. And sometimes the new staff, however minor the tweaks may be, they may decide that particular recruit is not a good fit for the new program.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a two-way street. Verbal commitments are non-binding. I mean, there's nothing binding by the school. There's nothing binding by the players. So, in Ohio State's situation, it's if you're gonna move away from a guy, this is the time to do it. Don't do it to him, in September or October and give the kid, 2 months to find a spot, So the fact that this was taken care of now allows both parties to find alternatives. So the timing is good. It felt like I initially expected it a couple months ago, and then when it wasn't happening, I'm like, okay, maybe this is going to drag into spring or summer when he can get some official visits in or whatever. But it just, like I said, it just came out today. So not really unexpected in terms of the final outcome.
Well, and this is interesting timing also because, this comes at a time where now Ohio State has some momentum reportedly for another Arizona running back, Bijan Robinson, who is ranked number 7 at running back position from Tucson, Arizona. And, Ohio State has several future casts out for him on the Rivals Network. Where do you think Ohio State is with Robinson right now?
Yeah, I think they're in a good spot. They definitely have his attention. I'm a big proponent of seeing these spring visits take place and things like that. So you want to see him on campus before you go, too crazy on this. But I think they have as good of a shot as anybody at this point. They are bringing in Kendall Milton at the beginning of April as well. So that's another interesting one. I mean, he's a 5-star guy out of California. So they've got some very talented guys lined up. I think they have a little better shot at Robinson than Milton right now, but I don't think Milton would be totally out of the equation either, especially with some of the just mess that USC is right now, which has kind of crushed them with some of these guys. So they've got some guys. It's going to be a multi-back class. It's going to be fascinating to see kind of how this all works together, because you not only have Robinson and Milton in there, but you have offered a few in-state guys. I mean, you've offered Mike Drennan out of Dublin Kaufman, and yes, maybe he's a more of a hybrid of an H, but they haven't told him that. I mean, it's been very much a running back offer. They're still in there on Jalen Berger out of New Jersey. If that's a guy, is he at the top of the board right now? I don't know. I think that was more of a Schiano production. So, could that be one where things have changed a little bit in terms of the staff changes, changing things up a little bit? But and they've offered Juton McClain out of Fairfield. So how this is all going to kind of get pieced together is going to be very interesting. I've kind of said this for a while. I think running back is going to be one of the more fascinating things, just because they're, like I said, they had Hubbard committed, who's essentially an in-state kid, for all intents and purposes. I mean, he's from Akron, and then you had offered Drennan and McClain. I was like, okay, but you're right there for Robinson and Milton. What are you going to do with this? You've got all these in-state offers out there, but you don't want to fill up with Robinson and Milton still out there, and you want to give them a chance to visit at least in the spring and kind of see where you're at. So it's going to be, running back's going to be really interesting. And for whatever reason, this has been a theme for 3 or 4 years now, where running back recruiting has just been weird. And I think that's going to continue. I think we've seen that continue here.
It really is. It's especially picking up right now. But the only thing that is definitely captivating me more is watching receiver recruiting. Mark, you're going to have to talk me down from this until I see otherwise. I don't believe Ohio State won't land every single 5-star receiver out there that they can possibly land, because they are just there is just so much buzz. It is amazing right now.
Yeah, and I've been kind of saying this recently on the board, especially with like Julian Fleming, where it's like I would almost have to see that to believe it, that Ohio State's going to get Julian Fleming.
It just seems so irrational, and yet it just feels like it could happen.
Right, and there's no this is I'm not down on what Hartline has done there. I think he has made this far more interesting than I could have imagined it would be, 6 months ago. But I kind of have to see it to believe it on Fleming. It's one of those, as I kind of wrote last week, it's one of those where every year usually, I'm not saying I'm always in lockstep with kind of what the Ohio State, contacts and sources tell me. It's not always that we're in lockstep, but usually we're on the same page on most things. And if we're not hearing the exact same thing, it's close. And then there's 2 or 3 kids every year, it seems like, where I just am not buying it, and they are surprisingly confident. And Fleming is that kid this year so far. So that's going to be something to watch. And I guess if you're Ohio State, why wouldn't you be confident right now? I said the other day to someone that Brian Hartline's been in the zone since he took this job. Why wouldn't he be confident?
Well,
he's been in the zone since July. Whatever he's just getting guy. I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to go and get G. Scott. I'm just going to go get Jackson Smith out of Texas, who I've only been recruiting a couple months. So we're just gonna we're gonna be the leader for Rakim Jarrett. Johnny Wilson. This guy is everything he's touching right now is just working. So if anyone's got an excuse to be overconfident, it would probably be Brian Hartline.
Well, and Mark, in the past, Fleming would be a guy that would seem to me, from just looking at it from the outside point of view, that he would seem like he's just playing the game publicly, and he wants people to think Ohio State has a chance over Penn State, but it's really just going to be Penn State. But, usually when that happens, you get the insider people and the people close to the program usually say, no, we don't have much of a chance. They usually know the situation despite what is said publicly. But this isn't the case here. It's like you said, I mean, they seem to be, from what I hear, they seem to be pretty confident. And this is, seems to match what he's saying publicly. So maybe he's not actually just playing the game.
No, I think, he's visited a couple times. He's going to visit again here soon. At some point here in the next, probably 6 to 8 weeks. I don't think the visit's been set yet. I think he's working on nailing that down. Was the last I had heard from him. But, he's doing some of those things. He also has visited Penn State a million times. And I know, people are going to bring up, I guess his girlfriend goes to Penn State and he's going there. I'm like, that's fine. I'm sure there's something to that, but there's a really good relationship there with James Franklin. And then I also think, oddly enough, the people who are confident in Ohio State's chances believe Clemson could be the biggest threat, which is just – so this is what I'm talking about here with the – every year there's like 2 or 3 kids where it's just like, this is not exactly what I'm getting, but other people, it's just kind of not lining up. What I'm hearing and what people close to Ohio State are hearing aren't quite lining up here. So, but with that in mind, I mean, he just did his top 6. So if you could cut that top 6 in half and divide it tier 1, tier 2, I think if nothing else, it's fair to say that tier 1 is Ohio State, Penn State, Clemson. And, the order of that is, I guess, depending on who you want to listen to.
What do you make of this, the recent emergence here with another St. Thomas Aquinas kid, Marcus Rosemy? He's another top 10 receiver, another guy that, they seem to be doing really well with now. What do you make of him and their chances there? Yeah, I mean, they've been on Marcus for a little while now, and obviously there was a transition there from Zach Smith to Brian Hartline, and so that, It's definitely a big positive for them that Brian Hartline has kind of picked things up there, and Marcus is a really good player. Is he as explosive as Jared or Fleming? Probably not, but he's kind of one of those throwback, like big body type guys that I know everyone's obsessed with speed now, but Marcus is just kind of a big, strong hands. Out physicals guys. He's a really good player, really good chain mover. And, I watched him, I think it was October. I was down there in the fall during the season. I watched them play. Obviously I was watching Jordan Battle, and Marcus had a real solid game. I like I said, I would put it in the same kind of ballpark as Robinson, maybe even a little bit better than that in terms of, if you put a gun to my head right now, yeah, sure. Ohio State. Is it going to end here in the next couple of weeks? I mean, I don't know about that. Aquinas has historically been a little bit different than maybe some of the other South Florida schools, but we're still talking about a South Florida guy with a lot of options. So, I think they've done a great job to this point. I think, I think the spring visits are big. We will see, by the end of April who made it in and who didn't. And that'll really start to kind of clear the air here. But, I like where they sit with Marcus. I like where they sit with Tim Jarrett still, very much. And then, the guy, man, Johnny Wilson's intriguing. I mean, guy's a freak. 6'5", can run, doesn't do a whole lot of interviews, keeps putting Ohio State on his top 5. No one really seems to know if that's legit or not, or if it's pumping his list up. And so it's fascinating, all the guys they're in on right now. So I want to jump from one Florida kid to another Florida kid and change position groups here. I want to ask you about Fred Davis, because now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Ohio State seems to have a lot of momentum for him. And, I know he's from Trinity Christian, and obviously they've had success there, but there was a period of time where it didn't look like they had much of a chance at Davis, and now it does. So, where did this momentum come from? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I would say that it just popped up. I think they're in it. I don't know that they're leading. I think Clemson really did a good job with him on his recent visit. I think Clemson's in there. I think they're going to be there the whole way.
I don't think this is going to end anytime soon. I think, as we've seen in the past with the Trinity Christian kids, even you get a guy like Sean Wade early. I mean, that did not end. I mean, that was still 2 more years of recruiting Sean Wade. So I think they have such a good reputation and relationship with the Trinity Christian guys right now that they're going to be a top school for Fred the whole way. I think they're going to be a top school for Miles Brooks the whole way. But I'm not going to jump on that just yet in terms of, they're definitely getting him or anything like that. I mean, I think they've done a really good job. I think the visit in November was good. I think they will, certainly get an official visit, and I think they'll be among his top few schools, but it's kind of like receiver there at corner. It's like they can't get all these guys. I mean, they're not going to get, I put out a list of 6 the other day. I mean, they're not going to get 6 of these. They're not going to get all 6. They're going at some point, they're going to lose a couple, and then a couple are going to jump in, and then the other guys are going to look at that and be like, maybe I'll go here, maybe I'll go there. So, it's early for Fred. It's early for the Florida guys. I like where they stand, and we'll see where it goes. I don't think anything has changed drastically in the last few weeks. Put it that way.
One last guy I want to ask you about here before we wrap up. So another corner, Elias Ricks, has been committed to LSU, but he did say recently that he's going to take 5 visits, and it appears Ohio State is going to get one of them. All you can ask for in a situation like that is to get him on campus, and there's still a long time between now and fall, so who knows, what's going to happen in the next 7 to 10 months. But do you see this getting wild again, or do you think these are going to be token visits and he sticks with LSU?
I think that if all things are equal, if LSU, has a good season this year, and there's no coaching controversies or anything like that, and Corey Raymond, our guy, is still on staff, and as long as LSU is stable, I think they're going to get him. So from there it becomes, is LSU going to be stable in 6 or 8 months? How is that? How are they going to come out of the gates this year? What's the landscape looking like for Raymond? What's the landscape looking like in terms of Ed Orgeron's hot seat, or whether he's on that or off that? I mean, which can vary from week to week down there. If things are stable, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough to pull him from LSU. USC, again, is such a mess right now. I don't see that getting any better. So it's really going to be, Ohio State and probably SEC. Can an SEC rival, can an Alabama or someone like that, Georgia, pull him? And we'll see. I think one thing that would help is if they got Legend Cavazos back in the fold, because those 2 guys are pretty tight. I don't think it makes or breaks the decision there, but if Legend would get back in the fold at Ohio State, I think that would make it would up the chances. I'll put it that way. I think it would definitely up the chances.
Since you mentioned Legend, have they made progress with getting him back in the fold, do you think?
Yeah, I think they have. He's coming up the 22nd of March. Talked to his dad the other day. They are coming up late March for a 2-day visit. They're going to watch there's going to be a spring practice, a scrimmage that weekend that they're going to watch. Jeff Hafley's been all over it. That was a guy that he reached out to immediately as soon as he was cleared by the NCAA, as soon as he passed the little exam he had to pass to be able to recruit. That was the first phone call I believe he made. So there's been good progress there in terms of just, you got to understand, first of all, the relationship with Urban Meyer was so far and away the number one reason they got that kid in the first place. So then you take him out of the picture, and yes, he's a special assistant to whatever's his title is. That's not the same thing as being the head football coach. It just not. And so when you take him out of the equation like that, and then on top of that, you blow up the defensive staff. There's a lot of things that have to be rebuilt there, and I think Legend's and his family are very comfortable with the program in terms of the off the field, the campus. I think there's a great comfort level with everything about Ohio State, but they don't know any of these coaches. That was the thing. And they've really worked hard. Ryan Day and Jeff Hafley have really worked hard there. And just talking to the family recently, talking to Legend a little bit, it feels like they have kind of turned a corner where they can start to pick up some momentum again if things go well on the visit.
It'll be interesting to watch. I kind of think that's a case where once they make it back up, Urban might be on campus, and that might, help just have the feelings of nostalgia seeing him around. That feels to me like something that could that help the matters as well.
Yeah, I think just a sit down where he can kind of vouch for Ryan Day and some of the guys he's brought in. That could certainly make a difference. Obviously they're open to it. There's no reason for them to visit in a few weeks, just, as a courtesy. They're clearly, Legend was very upfront when he decommitted. He said, I'm going to give them a chance to continue to recruit me. And I don't know. I guess some people were frustrated that he decommitted, but it's like, look, people complain all the time in this environment about guys, I'm 100% committed, but I'm taking, 10 other visits. Well, Legend to me did the mature thing. He said, I'm not committed right now. I'm taking other visits, so I'm not a commit. And he opened up his recruitment, and I think he's handled this very maturely. And I think, and I don't think he would be coming back up here if he wasn't. We have to take him as word, because every time he said something, he's essentially followed through on that. And so when he says that he's going to give Ohio State a real good, legitimate chance to get him back in the fold, I think he means it. I talked to him in person in San Antonio. I've been talking to his dad. I don't see any reason why they can't get him back. He's going to be right up there at the top of the board too. They've got, like we just talked about, they've got a lot of corners up there, but they really like him. He's 6'1", 6'2", he can run. So, there's a lot of reasons for Ohio State to continue at it here, and there's a lot of reasons there on their end to keep looking at Ohio State, given the opportunity at cornerback moving forward.
Well, it will be fun to watch, and I agree with everything you said on him, by the way. I think he's been completely sincere and genuine and straightforward, and there's no reason not to take him at his word. Well, Mark, I appreciate you joining us. Of course, you can catch Mark every day on BuckeyeGrove.com and, of course, on Twitter at MarkGivlerBG. Mark, I appreciate all the insight, and it's been fun as usual.
Yep, thanks.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So I mentioned Ohio State basketball. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But I want to jump back to this Zion thing, real quick. Look, I'm going to admit something here. I've been saying for the first part of the season, not so much recently, but the first part of the season, I was the person that was calling Zion Williamson overhyped, not necessarily overrated. I think he was rated properly and that he is legitimately one of the top 2 college basketball players in the country, with his teammate RJ Barrett probably being the other. And if they do in fact go out for the NBA draft like they're expected to, they will probably be drafted 1 and 2. I actually think that there's still a case to be made that if you're an NBA executive, you might want RJ Barrett over Zion Williamson. That you can make that argument. RJ Barrett is a really naturally polished scorer, and he has got a ceiling that is it's basically immeasurable, and that's not untrue for Zion Williamson, because Zion is such a freak athletically. He's such a good rebounder, and surprisingly, he's just an amazing defender. Duke's defensive stats when he is on the floor is like night and day from when he's not. He is a really, really good defender. He can guard, basically 1 through 5 if he has to. He moves his feet really well. He's, of course, a very good shot blocker. He's strong. He's really hard to move. If you're trying to back him down, there's everything to like about Zion Williamson as a defensive player. But for the first half of the season, I was calling him not so much overrated, just overhyped. And there is a difference. Overrated means that you can be rated about, where people think you are. That you can say, yeah, he's the best player in the country, and that can be true, but you could also be overhyped, meaning the production and, how good you actually are might be exaggerated. And for me, Zion Williamson was being overhyped. Well, I got to be honest. I have not really looked at Zion Williamson's stats. Everybody knows, if you listen to me for any period of time, I'm an analytics guy. I don't necessarily live and die by analytics, but I lean strongly towards them. I think that they don't always tell you what will happen in the future based on past results, but I think that they do tell you very accurately what has happened to this point. And you have to know, you got to sometimes have a keen sense, an instinct for the game to predict, what's going to happen and when to kind of regress how much you use analytics. But there are certain situations where you just can't argue with the numbers. I mean, sometimes that they are just that radical that you just have to take them, even if you don't take the number itself as gospel, you have to take the bottom line result. And so I was curious with Zion Williamson going down and all the discussion of whether or not he should sit out the rest of the year. And it looks like, if he does sit out the rest of the year, it's going to be strictly on his call because it sounds like he's day-to-day with his sprain. I personally think, by the way, Zion Williamson should do what makes him happy. I say this all the time. Every time this comes up, I said it with Nick Bosa. I say it with every single player that has a decision to make. Do what is going to make you happy. I think that there's plenty of reason to come back if he wants to. If he wants to win a title, I think that's reason enough to come back. If he doesn't, and if he just wants to save his body for the NBA draft, hey, who could blame him? He's got, probably $100 million on the table in future earnings when you add in, not just his career earnings, but all of the marketability and all advertising and everything that comes with it, okay? But as far as Zion himself, the question, of course, is if he does sit out, could Duke win a national title? And I was quick to say no in the first place, but out of curiosity, I looked this up. So his net rating, or Duke's net rating, when he is on the floor this year, and I went back and did the plus minus for 14 ACC games that they've had, in addition to 5 non-conference games, which included Kentucky, Gonzaga, Indiana, Texas Tech, and Auburn. Okay, so that's 5 non-conference games against major opponents, 4 power conference, and then Gonzaga, and then 14 ACC teams. So when he is on the floor, he has played in those games 563 minutes. They have outscored their opponents in those minutes when he's on the floor, the 563 minutes. They've outscored them 1187 to 939. That is a net rating, which is basically plus minus your offensive and defensive scoring differential. That's a net rating per 40 minutes of 17.7 points. So that means Duke in those minutes are outscoring other teams by 17.7 points per 40 minutes. Okay. When he is not on the floor in those same number of games, including the North Carolina game, which he got hurt in the first minute, and then the second half of the Florida State game, which he got hurt right before halftime and did not play in the second half. So in those games, he has been off of the floor on the bench for 202 minutes, and they have actually been outscored 299 to 340. So they are being outscored by 41 points in those 202 minutes, which is a net rating of minus 8.5 or 8.7, 8.2 per 40 minutes. That is a difference of 25 points per 40 minutes from when he is on the floor to when he is off the floor. Folks, that is absolutely insane. Now, I'm certainly willing to say that out of 202 minutes, that's still a somewhat of a small sample relative to when he's on the floor. So let's even just be conservative and say, without him, maybe longer term, they're a +5. That's still a difference in 12 points. They're 12 points worse in a normal game without him, folks. That takes Duke from a national title contender to maybe without him they would be a fringe bubble team. That's a big difference. So I think what this tells us is, number one, it tells us that Zion Williamson is really good. Okay, he's just absolutely amazing. In fact, here's how good he is. So, College Basketball Reference, which is a site that is really, really good for historical data as well as current data, they have a stat called net or adjusted box score rating, which is basically similar to the net rating on an individual level. It's basically, the concept is using all the data, offensive and defensive rating, and all the box score stats that you can compile, just how good you are over the average player per 40 minutes. Well, his net box score rating right now is +21. That means he's 21 points better theoretically than an average college basketball player. They've been tracking this stat since 2010. The next closest is +16. That means right now he is 5 points better in the last 10 years than any other college basketball player that has played the game. So it just gives you an idea. I mean, he is truly right now just an amazing college basketball player. And it's insane. The analytics just love this guy, and even if the analytics didn't love them on an individual basis, the net rating that I just gave you kind of says it all. So Zion Williamson, very good. It just goes to show that Duke right now, how many times have we said you can't count on freshmen? And Ohio State is learning this lesson right now. I mean, Ohio State can't count on Luther Muhammad every game. They can't count on Dwayne Washington every game. Even their sophomores, Kyle Young, Musa Jallo, guys that have some potential and could still develop for them, for the Buckeyes. You can't count on freshmen and sophomores. And even Duke is in a situation right now without Zion on the floor. They can't count on these other talented freshmen. R.J. Barrett is giving it game in, game out. But Cam Reddish is still kind of raw. Trey Jones is still kind of raw. Duke can't shoot. I mean, they're shooting 30% from three-point range this year, and that's even with getting a lot of open looks because of the attention defenses have to give from trying to stop Zion Williamson from getting to the rim. I mean, he's shooting 70% from two-point range because he gets to the rim so easily, and teams try to stop that, and Duke gets three-point looks because of it, and they still can't, make them. So without Zion, Duke is in a situation where they're relying on, talented guys, but they're freshmen and sophomores that are raw still, and that's the situation they're in. They need Zion Williamson on the floor, and the Buckeyes, who are also counting on freshmen and sophomores to kind of make this segue complete here. I'm going to make this transition. What we saw Ohio State do against Northwestern is what the Buckeyes have to continue to do the rest of the season. They got to get the ball into the paint, to Caleb Wesson. They got to get the ball on the baseline with Andre Wesson. If you listened last week to Corey Thompson and I, we talked about this. Andre Wesson has become a really good post player for Ohio State. Their offense, I think, runs a lot better when they're getting inside-outside touches, both Andre and Caleb. It makes Ohio State's offense better. And I thought the adjustments that Ohio State did, getting the ball down there on the baseline and taking advantage of Northwestern's deep overplay against them, it really allowed a lot of back cuts and secondary look passes from the low post. And this is what Ohio State has to be. This needs to be their identity. It's not going to work against every single team. Not every team is going to defend them the way that Northwestern did, but this is what Ohio State has to be the rest of the season. I look at this and I was looking at the turnover numbers, and in Big Ten play, there's been a huge difference from when Ohio State is turning the ball 5 times or fewer in a half in the Big Ten, as opposed to when they turn it over 8 times or more. You're seeing a difference sometimes in a net rating for a half of almost 8 to 10, sometimes 12 points in a single half. So Ohio State is definitely a better team when it's not turning the ball over. and they need that movement, because what happens is when they're not getting movement, they are getting in a situation with 7 seconds on a shot clock. Keyshawn Woods, who has lost his confidence, C.J. Jackson, who doesn't have a tight handle, Luther Muhammad, who makes up his mind sometimes that he's absolutely going to penetrate and he's going to try to score. What happens is these guys, when the shot clock runs down, they're getting into bad situations, and they make, are taking bad shots. And in some cases, they're turning the ball over, live ball turnovers. That's when the defense goes the other way with an easy score. Those things are compounding problems. And when Ohio State is not doing that, when it is moving the ball side to side, getting ball movement, their offense becomes a lot better. It's not a great offense. They just don't have the go-to scorers. They don't have the ball handlers, and they don't have a lot of consistent shooters. They have several guys who can make shots, but they don't have any consistent big-time shooters, okay? Because of all of that, they're not ever going to be a great offense this year. They've got help on the way, but for this year, they are what they are. But they can maximize their production. They've just got to do those things, and I thought this was a great step forward for Ohio State, but now they've got to keep it up because they've got a really tough path coming up. This weekend, they're at Maryland. Then they come back home on Tuesday. They play Iowa and Columbus. They go to Purdue. And then they go to Northwestern as well, and then they finish the season with Wisconsin at home. That's a very, very tough schedule. If they can win the games that they're supposed to win, they win at Northwestern, maybe pick off Iowa or Wisconsin or both, maybe or steal at Maryland or at Purdue, they're going to be in the tournament with no problems, no questions asked. But they can't afford to lose. They can't afford to lose these home games, or at least they got to win. I think I think they got to win one out of the last 2 home games, and it would help if they win at least 1 or 2 of those road games. So Ohio State basketball, great step forward. It was a small step for man, a giant leap for Buckeye kind against Northwestern. That is the recipe. That's the template. That's what they have to do the rest of the way, and they will be in the NCAA tournament. So that's going to wrap up the show for today. As I said, Ohio State, big game Saturday at Maryland. We will talk about it on Monday. Thanks to Mark Gibler for joining me. And make sure you listen to the show on Monday. You can catch us every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. You can also catch us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. Catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. I hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll be back at you again on Monday. Thanks, everybody.